September 2nd, 2025. Well, we've got past Labor Day, and I hope everybody had a good weekend there. Whatever. I want to kind of address the issue here of the kind of a report on how Trump's been doing so far. We're 8.5 months basically into his second term here, and if you will. And I think, well, first of all, let's look at just poll numbers. The Real Clear Politics average has him at -5, which actually I could say, well, anything that isn't positive is bad. But really, for a president who's as active and taking on as many issues as he is, I think that's pretty good. I think and also this polling is probably skewed a little bit by a lot of ultra left wing organizations that have some ridiculously negative polls. And but I think it's probably realistic. For one thing, Trump tends to be what I'd call kind of an overexposed figure. He's such a dominant figure in the news, and you're bound to get somebody a little bit irritated about this or that. And that's just kind of the nature of his way of operating. However, I think and remember, there's an intense campaign in liberal media sources to say anything negative every day of the week. So, and people do run into that, and it has an impact. However, I think that doesn't. And also, of course, he personally is not running for re-election again. I guess the bigger issue is the congressional race, and there's also the fact I think that you have a tendency to have a back reaction to whoever's in power in the term congressional election, the one that's opposite the presidential every 2 years. I mean, that I've mentioned that before. That's an expectation. The new twist on this is this battle of redistricting that's going on, which is initiated, I guess, with Texas, but now California is going to attempt it, and several other red states are attempting it, and so forth. Maybe New York will attempt it again. I mean, they kind of got blocked on some of the things they were going to do last time. Whether this is a productive thing to do or not, I don't know. I mean, obviously, the Democrat states can, in many instances, counteract. However, well, if something should end up blocking some of their measures, um, perhaps they're going too far. I don't think that necessarily the ones I've heard about the Republican states are that unrealistic. Although I do question, well, why didn't you do that last time? It may well be that the last election showed some demographic shifts that weren't expected back in 2020, and therefore, like for instance, the Texas may find that even Latino-dominated districts might become more Republican, and therefore they'd be willing to, redistrict that way. So there is some chance that I guess if everything works out great, he might salvage something. However, right now it looks like that the history will probably not be changed tremendously at this point. Um, on the good side, I think we have definitely closed the border to a great extent. I mean, as much as possible at this point. And I guess he's actually now with his bill the big bill passed. I think he's able to now actually go out and have time to complete the wall and then install the various sensors. Redeploy Border Patrol to do their job. ICE has deported 250,000 illegal aliens so far. And I don't know how many have self-deported, but that's I haven't heard that number, but but I think that gives you an idea that if in 7.5 months you get 200,000, I mean, you could project ahead what could if he could continue to beat back these left-wing courts, what you might accomplish in a 4-year term, which would probably be somewhere in the range of maybe 1.4 million out of probably over 20 some million that are here illegally. It'll be a proportion, and it may have already affected some of the jobs numbers, because I think that you ought to take into account that there's also AI that's probably affecting probably some of the college new hires job prospects on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have, I think, the deportations, and I think also a tendency of illegal aliens to kind of go to ground and hide a little bit, I suspect, to avoid potential deportation. But so I don't know that that really is bad. It looks like maybe there'll be progress on lowering interest rates a little bit, which has been a big Trump objective here. With we don't know what's going to happen with this lady who's with the home mortgage issue. However, that overall it looks like the Fed is moving in the direction that Trump wants, but obviously not nearly as fast. On the taxes, and that's an interesting question. In the big bill, of course, he did get his tax plan passed, at least as edited by Congress, particularly the Senate. And of course, the thing I've always feared about that one is the idea that, well, for most people, as a majority, that is, well, most people, but for many people, I don't know if they'll notice much different than what they would have had last year. Um, Depending on who you are, if you're a tipped worker, particularly one that's, well, a typical tipped worker, let's say, working in a restaurant or something like that, you'll probably notice some change. But remember, those people are probably in the lower income brackets anyhow, and if they have dependents and so forth, the child tax credit will affect most people with children, of course, and that's been extended. Um, the no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, has mutated away from what it might sounded like. What it seems to have come down to is that for hourly workers, that is not salaried exempt workers, but hourly workers, basically union and other non-union workers, they're under that labor law, where you get time and a half for over 40 hours per week. Uh, the half part will not be taxed under income tax, but the time part will be, which means that if you work 48 hours, your 8 hours, you would get 48 hours fully taxed, and then you would get 8 hours half taxed for the extra half. And then for Social Security, the idea of no tax on Social Security, which has been quite a windfall for let's say, the upper 20% of Social Security retirees in terms of income. That didn't happen. Well, instead, they went with a $6,000 deduction, which is prorated in certain bands of adjustable gross income, which I understand will cover about 88% of Social Security recipients, so that they probably won't be paying any income tax. The other 12% will, but they'll get a benefit. Yeah. But for everybody else, I think essentially the tax rates will not be changed. They'll be just what they were last year. And that was not what was going to happen. If the bill hadn't have passed, or some reasonable facsimile thereof, what would have happened would have been that you would have had a big tax increase on the whole middle income bracket. The Democrats, in their own deception campaign, keeps talking about it was a tax cut for the very rich. But in reality, this one particularly doesn't change the very richest tax picture much at all in terms of income taxes. Now, business tax is a little bit different, and for people who own a business, there will be some benefits for businesses. And if a person has a business, well, that's that. And if good tidings for business leads to profits in the markets, well, then obviously that will be a benefit there. But it's not. But also the business tax also helps a worker by creating more jobs and employment. So that looks to be positive. The main thing is something negative has been averted with some positive enhancements around the edges, I think, those edges cover a good percent of the population if you count those with dependent children on the one hand, tipped workers on the other hand, people who are working overtime that are except for salaried exempt on the other hand, and Social Security recipients. That all adds up to a package of benefits for a lot of people. So that should be a benefit to them, but it won't. It should. And when you consider, I think it did help somewhat in the last administration, his first term. However, when it was passed in the first place, but there was so much negativity going on with all these investigations that things became a bit more muddled. And the Democrat lie campaign, as always, affects a lot of people. So if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, or you can follow me on Rumble, which is in the description below for the address. Yeah, so that's kind of the way I see this. Now, on his peacekeeping effort, which is being highly touted, he's definitely intervened in some conflicts. However, I think this is more, for PR than reality. I mean, I mean, do we really think that India and Pakistan were really going to have a nuclear war over a terrorist event and a relatively minor retaliation? I doubt it. I think they both had limited objectives. Um, you know, the terrorist attacked, and I'm not sure that the Pakistan government was really behind it, but they're being blamed for not preventing it. On the Indian side, they did carry out a reprisal, which showed some resolve. On the Pakistani side, they did shoot down some Indian airplanes with their Chinese purchased missiles, and so I think everybody was ready to call it a draw, and he was a good facilitator in ending it. But anyway. But it's good. It's good. He's out there striving for the Nobel Prize, and we hope he gets it. This big one, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war. That's a whole different can of worms, so to speak. That's a real can of worms. The problem with that thing is that and of course, I have a very distant opinion on this, and my thinking is that the real problem here is basically Ukraine, and the Ukraine problem was caused largely by us, and that is not during the Trump administration so much as going way back to the Bush years, and through the revolt that was promoted by our special services, if you will, our various NGOs and the CIA and USA, all those people, I think, had their role in promoting the coup in 14, which then led to everything that occurred since then. And the problem right now is that if you see in the negotiations that the Russians are willing to accept a deal where they will be way short of conquering all of Ukraine. In fact, it's a relatively smaller part. It's mostly the Russian ethnic areas, at least that were that before the war. But the thing is that Ukrainians are really unwilling to compromise, and so I think that's the real factor there. And obviously, there's this ongoing fear that Russia wants to conquer all of Ukraine or even attack NATO, which I think is both things are wrong. But you can see that essentially, although our press doesn't trumpet this fact, what the proposals that were put forward, the Ukrainian response is basically a flat no. Just have a ceasefire, let us build up our military capabilities, and then we'll see what happens. But I think that's would be a prelude to resuming the war, and it, of course, would tip the scales, let's say, to their advantage to some degree, maybe not overall. And the bad thing about this is, I think, is at the high end, Russia being a nuclear power, obviously, if they really are on the losing side, probably could escalate. I mean, I think that's a real risk here, and that could spiral into a complete global catastrophe. I don't think it would happen in one step. I mean, I don't think it'd be like they drop one bomb and then full-scale nuclear war breaks out within minutes. I don't think that would happen. But I think that the consequences could be pretty escalatory. And hopefully that won't happen. As long as Russia's winning, I think that's not going to happen. The question is how bad they might have to lose before that would be considered. So that's one of the main. I think that's for us is the main thing we should be concerned about. I mean, I'm not. Trump has managed to apparently shift the economic burden of the war toward the European countries, which they must be sitting there. You got us into this stuff, and now we're supposed to pay for it. I don't mean you in the sense of Trump. I mean the United States, which was under other administrations, Bush and Obama, and maybe a little bit the first Trump administration. But this is the situation there, and I think that's an area where we may have problems. There's also, of course, the Epstein matter, and with Congress now back coming into session, we'll see where that goes. There's a bunch of resolutions and stuff that were kind of stalled with the recess. But at this point, the appropriate House, I guess, Oversight Committee is now investigating the Epstein matter, and the Justice Department is providing information and files that have been subpoenaed. And so we'll see where that goes to. To me, I always found that Trump handling of that was very awkward, and it's unclear what he's really concerned about in there. The Democrats have this fantasy that they've got the big event that he had something with somebody who was underage or something, and that's going to come out. I tend to think that's not true or in the files. I think what he probably is concerned about is a false accusation, which, I mean, is very possible. I mean, I don't think all the accusations have been labeled on him in these regions are all true, but maybe some were. You know, those were all, of course, mature women. And there is a lawsuit he's lost in New York, fair or unfair, and with a very massive judgment, seemingly disproportionate. I mean, but nonetheless, especially based on the evidence in their case. But the thing is that's going to have to come to a resolution somehow, and I guess it will now. And we'll see what happens. The other thing that's left is worth ending the fiscal year is what about the big budget? We haven't got that resolved yet. And of course, I'm looking at we're probably going to have a continuing resolution as always, which won't fully implement all the policies that Trump would want, you know, obviously, because that will be based on the last Biden budget, right? With certain tweaks. So that's kind of the way I see the situation. I think that it's hanging in there in the polls at a fair rate. Will redistricting save us? Maybe. But, you know, it does look like the thing has been so gerrymandered now that you don't have the massive movements in the Congress you used to. Although, and the other thing is hanging out there is this recent court decision, which I mentioned in my last video, the appellate court for D.C. ruling that the tariffs were illegal. And of course, that's going to go to the Supreme Court. And if by any chance the Supreme Court rules against them, that would be a major blow both to our policies, to the budget, and to the national prestige, I think. That's why I think with a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court, I think we can probably squeak through with a 5-4 maybe. Because if they blow that up, I mean, not only are they blowing up the deficit, they're also blowing up the whole prestige and credibility of the administration in the international arena. And that's a lot more than that'd be at stake than just one president's reputation. It's the country's. Are we that unstable? Well, maybe we're becoming a little bit. But I remember even in the appellate decision with a Democrat majority court, we still got a 4-7. So we had 4 votes in our favor. So all we need is to get 5-4 in the Supreme Court, and his tariffs would stay. So anyway, that's a major overhang he's got out there, and and of course his anti-crime push. We'll see how that goes. He's doing pretty good in the short term in D.C., but with his 30 days running out, what will Congress do with that? And if he has to stand down, I think he might have to stand down with the troops. I don't think he'll have to stand down with federal agents, but there's a limited number of federal agents, not enough to really fully police the whole country. So that has to be used selectively. So we'll have to see where that goes, but at least he showed that aggressive enforcement can make an impact. So at any rate, that's kind of my rundown. I think I'm basically positive about how things are going. I've highlighted the strong points, and I think a little bit where some of the danger zones are. So I'll be wrapping this up for now, and until next time, you can. Of course, I post this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and the addresses my social media accounts are in the description below. So all for now.